It was the middle of a brutal heat wave when the storm finally broke. Lightning cracked through the sky like it was splitting the earth in half, and I barely glanced up from my desk until my phone buzzed. Not a text. Not an alert from the weather service. It was a notification from my storm shelter's motion sensor. The one buried beneath fake lawn in the far corner of my backyard. The one only 3 people on Earth knew how to access. And I was the only one in town. I tapped the feed and stared in disbelief. There, standing dead center in the shelter's camera view, was Karen Whitmore, HOA tyrant, neighborhood menace, and self-proclaimed guardian of suburban aesthetics, holding a flashlight and a pair of bolt cutters like she was about to rob a bank. She looked stunned, like she'd expected to find some shady hole in the ground, and instead walked into a classified military bunker. And then, click. The hatch behind her shut with a mechanical hiss, and the biometric locks engaged. Karen was locked inside, trapped, 3 feet underground. Inside my federally funded high-security emergency shelter. I let out a slow whistle. "Well, Karen," I muttered, sipping from my coffee mug, "you finally did it." There was no reason to panic on my end. The whole place was stocked for 3 months. Karen could throw her tantrum from behind reinforced steel while the storm howled above, and I watched from the comfort of my living room. As her flashlight beam jerked wildly across the walls and her voice began echoing through the speakers, yelling about unlawful detainment and HOA sovereignty, I realized I was witnessing something no court, no lawyer, no fine ever could have accomplished. Poetic justice. I could have rushed home, but I didn't. I let it simmer, stopped for gas, grabbed an iced tea, let the storm clouds do their thing. Because what led to this? Oh, it wasn't random. Karen had been at this for months, harassing me over the shelter, calling it an eyesore, even though it was buried and invisible, issuing fake fines, showing up unannounced with a clipboard and a smirk. But today, she'd crossed the line. She trespassed, cut the locks, opened a federal-grade hatch meant to protect lives, and triggered a tamper protocol that automatically sealed the door to prevent contamination or intrusion. She'd broken in, and now she was locked in, by design. As thunder cracked over the roof and the wind started to pick up, I finally pulled into my driveway, calm as ever. Across the street, Karen's little cronies, Todd and Marlene, stood awkwardly under a patio umbrella, trying to pretend this wasn't happening. They looked like middle schoolers who dared each other to toilet paper the principal's house and then chickened out at the last second. I waved at them with a smile and walked straight to the disguised control panel built into my shed, tapped the screen, pulled up the intercom, and said, with the driest voice I could muster, "You are trespassing inside a federally protected emergency shelter. Please remain calm. Authorities have been notified." Her scream nearly shattered the mic. That was when I called the sheriff, and that was when the storm really started. That morning started the same way all good days do. Coffee, sunshine, and 0 HOA emails in my inbox. I was working remotely from the corner table at the Roasted Bean downtown, sipping a cappuccino and reviewing satellite payload specs when my phone buzzed. Not unusual. I had motion alerts set up for every angle of my property. Usually it was a raccoon or a drifting shadow, but when I opened the camera app, I saw her. Karen Whitmore, in a neon pink windbreaker, pacing the edge of my backyard like a prison warden inspecting the fence line. Todd and Marlene, her loyal clipboard flunkies, hovered nearby, whispering and pretending to measure shrubs. Classic Karen. I chuckled, texted a couple of neighbors. "The Karen Patrol is live again. Stay indoors and hide your yard gnomes." But then I noticed something different. Karen wasn't just snooping. She was standing on top of the artificial turf that covered my storm shelter, looking down, scanning, like she was searching for a seam. That's when the hairs on my neck stood up. She was looking for the hatch. Now, for context, my shelter wasn't some backyard doomsday bunker. I'm an aerospace systems engineer. I had that thing built to FEMA Level 5 specs, reinforced walls, filtered air, thermal insulation, biometric security. It was half funded by a federal mitigation grant. and every inch of it was completely legal, permitted, registered, documented. The HOA had no say, but Karen hated that. Hated that she couldn't control it. Hated that I had built something beyond her reach. So she did what petty tyrants always do. She tried to find a loophole. I figured she'd huff and puff for a few minutes, then storm off to type another angry email about neighborhood consistency. I put my phone down, finished my coffee, and headed home. I had no idea she'd brought bolt cutters. By the time I pulled onto my street, the clouds were rolling in thick and gray. I parked, walked casually toward my shed, which housed the control panel, and pulled up the motion logs again. That's when I saw the triggered alert. Shelter hatch, tamper detected. Entry cycle engaged. She'd done it. Karen had actually opened the hatch. The system, designed to give a 30-second entry window during a forced breach, had allowed her inside, then locked her in airtight. And I was watching the whole thing live on my security feed. She was down there, pacing, shouting, waving her flashlight around like she'd discovered a Bond villain's lair. She shouted something about illegal modifications and unauthorized infrastructure. She tried the hatch, kicked it, and even banged on the walls with her clipboard. It was glorious. I leaned into the mic and said, "Please remain calm. Trespassing is a federal offense. Law enforcement has been notified." The scream that followed could have registered on the Richter scale. Outside, Todd and Marlene stood frozen on the sidewalk, mouths open. I made eye contact with them, then looked pointedly at the hatch in my yard, then back at them. They didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dare get involved. I didn't blame them. A few minutes later, as the wind picked up and sirens began to blare in the distance, I stepped inside, sat down at my desk, and called the sheriff's department. "Yeah, hi," I said, unable to keep the smile out of my voice. "I've got an intruder locked in my federally registered storm shelter. Yes, locked inside. No, I didn't trap her. The system did. On its own. Yeah, her name's Karen Whitmore, from the HOA. There was a long pause on the other end. Then the dispatcher said, "We'll send deputies right away." And I leaned back in my chair, watching the clouds roll in, listening to Karen's echoing rants through the feed. She was going to need more than bolt cutters to get out of this one. The sirens started echoing across the sky right around the time the sheriff's SUVs rolled up my driveway. 2 black and white cruisers, 4 deputies, lights flashing. Todd and Marlene were still rooted to the sidewalk like they'd forgotten how feet worked. Across the street, a few neighbors had emerged onto porches, mugs in hand, pretending not to stare. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know yet how deliciously stupid it was. I met the deputies at the edge of my driveway. The lead guy, a thick-necked, no-nonsense type named Deputy Halverson, gave me the kind of squint that meant he'd already heard the story from dispatch and didn't believe half of it. "I'm Daniel Briggs," I said, handing him a folder. "Owner of the property. Here are the permits, the grant documents, the site plans, and the footage from both internal and external cameras. You're going to want to watch this." Halverson flipped open the folder and barely blinked. "And she's still in there?" "Locked herself in," I said. "Tamper protocol did exactly what it was designed to do." He arched an eyebrow. "This isn't a bunker. This is a federal-grade shelter?" "Correct. Designed for FEMA-level emergencies. Fully permitted. And also," I tapped my phone, bringing up the feed. "Fully monitored." I turned the volume up. Karen's voice blasted from the speakers. "I demand a different brand of water. I know my rights. You can't keep me down here like some prisoner?" Halverson stared at the feed, listening to Karen's voice screeching through the intercom, demanding lemon-scented hand wipes and threatening to call the mayor, the governor, and the president of the Tornado Bureau. "Dear God," he muttered. Then he turned to the other officers and said, "All right, boys. Let's go pull a woman out of a concrete box before she starts filing complaints with the weather." The deputies followed me to the disguised hatch control panel behind my shed. I keyed in the override sequence, something I'd designed to be airtight but accessible to first responders, and with a loud hiss, the hatch unlocked. When it opened, Karen practically burst out of the shelter, hair frizzed, face blotchy, shirt soaked through with sweat, and something orange that looked suspiciously like spilled survival rations. Her sandals squelched with each furious step. She looked like someone who had been trapped in a high-tech panic room with nothing but her ego and a clipboard to keep her company. And they had both betrayed her. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're going to pay for this. I was conducting a neighborhood inspection and you imprisoned me like a criminal." Halverson stepped forward, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, please stop talking. But you are currently under investigation for unlawful entry, tampering with federal emergency infrastructure, trespassing on private property, and interfering with a disaster mitigation site during an active storm. Warning, please place your hands where I can see them." Karen blinked. Then she laughed, until two deputies gently but firmly turned her around and cuffed her wrists. That was when the laughing stopped. I heard a neighbor gasp from across the street. Karen tried to spin it. "I'm the president of this HOA. I'm conducting lawful business." "No, ma'am," Halverson replied, dry as sandpaper. "You're conducting yourself straight into a felony charge." Todd and Marlene, those loyal clipboard soldiers, tried to slink away. I didn't let them. I met them halfway down the driveway. "Going somewhere?" Todd swallowed hard. "We didn't know she was going to break in. We thought she was just looking." "With bolt cutters?" I asked. "In a storm?" Marlene looked like she was about to cry. She said it was a safety check. "And now it's a criminal case," I said, smiling coldly. "Good luck explaining that to the new board." They turned a lovely shade of pale. By now, a small crowd had gathered. More neighbors, curious kids, someone filming on a phone. I stood near the hatch, arms crossed, watching as Karen, now handcuffed and mud-splattered, was escorted to the back of a cruiser. She shouted about her rights, about conspiracies, about FEMA infiltration. The deputy just opened the door and shut it behind her without a word. Then came the moment that changed everything. A sleek black SUV with government plates rolled up behind the patrol cars. 3 people stepped out, dark windbreakers, FEMA. One of them nodded at me and said, "Mr. Briggs, we're here to investigate the breach of your federally funded shelter." And that was when I realized this wasn't just a Karen problem anymore. This was federal. By the time the FEMA agent stepped into my garage-turned-control center, Karen was already halfway to county lockup. She was still screaming, mind you, about civil rights, the HOA charter, federal entrapment, which, by the way, isn't a thing when you're the one breaking in. But the cruiser doors sealed that up tighter than my shelter hatch. The agents didn't waste time. They moved fast, clipped, methodical. One pulled security logs straight off my backup drives. Another asked questions about installation specs, biometric overrides, and who else had attempted access. The lead agent, a sharp-eyed woman with an "I don't have time for BS" posture, walked through my security system like she'd done this 100 times. When she saw Karen's entry log, time-stamped, video verified, complete with audio, her only response was a single dry comment. "Well, she's cooked." And I didn't disagree. Because when you breach a federally subsidized disaster shelter with bolt cutters and then get sealed inside during an active storm warning, you're not just HOAing a little too hard. You're breaking about 5 different laws. By sundown, it was everywhere. My phone started lighting up like a pinball machine. First came the texts from neighbors. "Did that actually happen? Tell me Karen really got locked in your bunker. Please tell me there's footage." Then came the social media flood. Someone, probably one of the teens loitering under a raincoat across the street, had filmed her exit from the hatch. Karen, soaked, smeared with ration food, screeching about property rights while being cuffed and stuffed into the back of a cruiser. The video hit local Facebook groups, then Reddit, and then somehow, BuzzFeed. The title? Storm Shelter. Karen, HOA president breaks in, gets locked inside like a supervillain. Within hours, she was trending, and by morning, she was a meme. Meanwhile, the HOA board was burning like a dumpster fire behind a picket fence. Todd and Marlene, the two spineless lapdogs she dragged along for her inspection, went into full self-preservation mode. By noon, the HOA had sent out an email titled Clarification Regarding Recent Events. It was a 5-paragraph word salad that basically boiled down to, Karen acted independently. We had no idea she was going to go full bunker burglar. Please don't sue us. They even tried to call an emergency meeting that night. I wasn't planning on going until I got a text from Mrs. Pickens. Yeah, that Mrs. Pickens, the one who's lived here since the Nixon administration and could outstare a statue. She texted me, Daniel, be there tonight. You'll want to hear what Karen said about you that morning. So I showed up and walked straight into a neighborhood civil war. The community hall was packed, folding chairs full, people standing in back, tension thick in the air. A few folks looked excited, a few looked scared, but most, they looked done. Todd stood up front, sweat beading under his comb-over. Marlene clutched her clipboard like it might sprout wings and fly her out of there. I'd like to begin by addressing the incident involving former board president Karen Whitmore. Someone in the crowd cut him off. Former? Todd stammered. Yes, she has been temporarily removed pending investigation. That got a laugh. Bitter. Loud. Then Mrs. Pickens stood up. I heard her, she said clearly. This wasn't spontaneous. She told Todd and Marlene at 8 a.m. she was going in if she had to, that she'd find a violation no matter what. Todd turned white. Marlene looked like she might faint. Then I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I walked to the front, dropped a thick file onto the podium, full of Karen's emails, text screenshots, inspection notices she forged, clips of her bragging about showing Daniel who's really in charge. And I just said, this is the record of every harassment, every attempt, every escalation, until she finally broke into a federally protected shelter. Then I added, and if you don't remove the rest of this board tonight, you'll be hearing from my attorney next. Someone clapped, then two, then the whole room. Todd tried to salvage it. We were misled. I leaned forward. No, you were cowards. And just like that, a motion was made, voted, carried. The HOA board was officially dissolved pending re-election. People started hugging me on the way out. Handshakes, smiles, even from neighbors who'd avoided me for years. And as I left, someone had taped a new sign to the clubhouse door. No unauthorized inspections. Violators will be safely sealed underground. The morning after the emergency meeting felt different. The air was lighter. My phone wasn't buzzing with complaints. No passive-aggressive HOA notices on my doorstep. No clipboard shadows lurking around my shed. Just quiet. For the first time since moving here, I could sip my coffee without glancing over my shoulder. Karen's house sat dark and still across the street. Curtains drawn, no sign of movement. The for sale by owner sign that popped up overnight leaned at an awkward angle, like it had been hammered into the ground by someone in a blind panic. Rumor had it her lawyer quit after seeing the viral footage. Couldn't blame him. Because this wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It had made national news, cable segments, Twitter threads, even a segment on late-night TV where a comedian called her the storm shelter sheriff who tried to regulate tornadoes. People were mailing me custom signs, bumper stickers, even a handmade doormat that read, "Welcome to Briggs Shelter. Unauthorized entry includes free lock-in." I didn't mind the attention. But I didn't chase it either. What mattered more was the fallout, the real kind. FEMA had opened an investigation. The lead agent emailed me personally to thank me for my cooperation. Said tampering with a federal grant site could carry felony charges. Karen's list of charges was growing longer than one of her old violations reports. Criminal trespass, tampering with emergency infrastructure, interfering with federal disaster systems, filing false HOA records, and, of course, unlawful entry word. spread that she tried to countersue the HOA, claimed emotional distress, betrayal, even entrapment by design. It was laughed out of court. Her name became shorthand for failure in every community forum I knew. I didn't see her again after the arrest. 1 week later, a moving truck pulled up to her house. Nobody waved. Nobody helped. A few neighbors stood on porches sipping coffee, watching her boxes get loaded like spectators at a farewell parade. She didn't look at anyone, just climbed into the passenger seat of a beat-up SUV and disappeared down the cul-de-sac. The quiet she left behind was its own kind of celebration. The new HOA elections brought out more voters than any community event in years. People who never got involved suddenly cared, and the ones Karen had steamrolled, they stood tall this time. The new board rewrote the rules from scratch. No unilateral fines. All inspections require homeowner consent. Board members limited to 2-year terms. And best of all, no more power trips. I was asked to run, politely declined. But I did agree to sit on an advisory committee, mostly so no one ever tried to inspect my shelter again. One Saturday evening, I came home to find a small group gathered outside my fence. A few neighbors, some teens, a guy from the woodworking shop down on Main. They had a gift. A wooden sign, beautifully engraved, lacquered for weather, mounted on metal posts. It read, "Private property. Unauthorized entry may result in extended underground accommodations. Hi, Karen." Below that, a little carving of a tornado chasing a woman with a clipboard. I laughed harder than I had in years. We mounted it beside the path to the shelter. Subtle, tasteful, perfect. Karen's downfall didn't fix everything overnight, but it did something. Neighbors started talking again, laughing, hosting backyard BBQs without HOA permission slips. A kid down the block even built a lemonade stand, something Karen had shut down years ago for commercial activity. Life bloomed. And me? I upgraded the shelter's lock system just for fun, not out of fear, just because it felt good to build something in peace again. One evening, I stood on my porch as the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky with oranges and blues. Duke, my German shepherd, rested at my feet. The wind rustled through the grass, and for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't tense. It was peaceful. I looked out across the yard and smiled. Karen had tried to bury me in rules and bureaucracy, but she ended up locking herself in the one place I built to withstand anything. She thought she could control everyone. She didn't count on the storm shelter being smarter than she was. And now, she was gone. And the neighborhood, my neighborhood, finally belonged to the people who actually lived in it. I guess that's the funny thing about storms. They always pass, but sometimes, if you're lucky, they take the garbage with them.